But now let's bring in former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger and Labor power broker Graham Richardson. Welcome, gentlemen, to you both. Michael, I want to start by getting your response to the national account data out today and the news that we're now in a record household recession, 7 consecutive quarters in a row.
Well, what it means is that the Australian public has been in a recession for 1 3/4 years, almost 2 years. But everyone knows that. The lived experience of people is that they are doing it harder than they've ever done in their life. And this is off of the back of Albanese winning the election on the basis of, these great sort of advertising lines. There's a cost of living crisis. Power bills will be reduced, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this was all a fraud. He had no idea what he's doing. He's got a second-rate treasurer who, as I've said for a long time, is a commentator. He's not a treasurer's bootlace. He wouldn't make the top 20 of any Labor government of the last, 20 or 30 years, poor old Jim. And basically the economy is running him. He's not running anything. And so these are disastrous accounts propped up by unsustainable, massive government expenditure at federal and state level. And we know where this is all going. We've seen this movie before in Victoria, in South Australia. It's disastrous state governments, and this will probably end up being a Labor government worse than that of Kevin Rudd. And that's saying something, Sharri.
Well, Richo, I mean, spin aside, these are the weakest figures since Paul Keating's recession. If you put lockdowns to one side, the government's argument is that without the government spending, we would be in a recession right now. But families feel like they're in a recession because of the data, the GDP per capita.
Yeah, times are definitely tough, and the economy is not doing everything that Jim Chalmers tells it should do. And I think that is pretty obvious to the ordinary person in the street who usually doesn't care much about economics or politics, but people are feeling the pinch at the moment, and times are tough. If that doesn't turn around in a reasonably short time, then the government may pay a very big price at the ballot box.
Indeed, because this is going to be the biggest issue, and if we see blackouts over summer, and I'm going to speak about that with Angus Aitken in a moment. Well, let's move on to the worst foreign minister in Australia's history, Penny Wong. I have to tell you, it just feels like Groundhog Day. It feels like every week I have to talk about the latest shocking thing Penny Wong has done, and now this disgraceful move, Australia changing our position to support more UN resolutions against Israel. And this one, the first one, demands, and I'm going to quote from this here, that Israel bring to an end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible. No demand in this resolution for the terrorists that run Gaza to recognise Israel. No demand in this resolution for the terrorists to return the hostages. God forbid anyone at the UN should care about the hostages. Michael Kroger, what is wrong with Penny Wong and this government?
Well, they are hard left extremists. That's what they are. Albanese, Wong, these people are of the hard Labor left. This is the Bill Hartley faction from the 1970s. This is not the Hawke faction. This is a debate which goes back 50 years in Labor Party history, which Graham knows better than me. But Bill Hartley was a hard left pro-Palestinian activist here in the Labor movement in the 70s. And this is his faction, which have finally wrestled control of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party. I mean, Israel has tried to give back the disputed territories on any number of occasions since 1948. They've tried to give the Golan Heights back to Syria, but they don't seem to want them. And we have the UN passing these ridiculous resolutions. It's time, Sharri, for the UN to sit down and tell the world, for Penny Wong to tell the world, what type of Palestinian state are we looking at? What we know is this: it's not going to be a democracy, right? Because Hamas and Fatah don't have elections. There's not going to be freedom of the press in a Palestinian state. There's not going to be freedom of religion unless you're a Sunni. They won't recognise Israel's right to exist. There's no freedom of religion. There's no rights for gays. There's hatred of the Americans. There's death to America and death to the West. That's the type of Palestinian state we are looking at. If the UN would sit down and tell the truth about, but what we have are these sort of, resolutions in theory without any practice. I mean, a Palestinian state, on the basis of everything I've said, is going to be like an Iranian theocracy, although run by the Sunni rather than the Shia. That's what people are looking for, if this comes to pass. That's what's going to happen if this comes to pass.
perfectly put, Michael Kroger. That is just so well said. And Richo, he's right. I mean, what exactly is the rush here for Penny Wong to recognise at least one Palestinian territory run by a terror regime?
Yeah, I wonder. I don't have an answer for that. I wish I did. And I agree with pretty well everything that Michael just said. I think Australia has dropped the ball on Israel in the Middle East and the Palestinian territories. I think we're handling it pretty poorly. And I think at some stage of the game, we've just got to stand up and admit who our mates are, who have got to be looked after, and who are the people who would rather kill us than look after us. And that's what really annoys me about this.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. There's this total confusion under the Albanese government about who our allies are and who our enemies are. And this is because you have two far left figures in Albanese and Penny Wong running the show. It's just so frustrating. It really is. Now, I want to turn to US politics.
And by the way, Sharri, so before we do that, Sharri, we keep reading about the Palestinian Authority being reconstructed. Well, as Michael Danby says, they're now about to be 20 years into their 4-year term. They've had 20 years to rebuild, reconstruct, reorganise, whatever. What's Mahmoud Abbas waiting for? There's no reconstruction of the Palestinian Authority. They're an old, corrupt, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel regime that grew out of the PLO. He's had decades to rebuild him, to reorganise himself, and not be corrupt. What's he waiting for? So the notion that there's going to be some pure American, Australian, British-style democracy is an utter absurdity. But the UN should be honest and tell people this is what a Palestinian state will look like. It will look like an Iranian theocracy. That's what you're voting for, Penny Wong. Well done.